By the way, I love that they are upset that they don't have enough time to appeal because they already know they don't want it. It's not like they don't have enough time to like get comfortable with the idea.
No, it's like we need more time to appeal.
We really, no matter what, we just don't want this here, and we're going to fight it until we get this. Hi, I'm Lauren.
I'm Jen. This is Build Order. Today, we're talking about power. Who actually has the power in Austin? And I don't mean politically. I mean the electrons that keep your AC running in the middle of summer and the control over where those come from. So let's talk about a typical June day here in Austin. It can be in the upper 90s, sometimes even in the hundreds. It's super hot. You're already sweating, and you come inside at 2, 3 p.m., all of a sudden you have a text message on your phone asking you to conserve and to sweat it out. Keep that AC turned up as opposed to turning it down and keeping you cool. All of this to protect the grid. At the same time, you're reading about all these new data centers coming online, drawing as much power as a small city, and they get to keep their power online 24/7, no conservation text message required. That is the contrast we're talking about today, a grid asking households to ration while the biggest new customers in history are lining up to plug in. Underneath every growing city, Austin included, are systems that no one thinks about until they fail. The poles, the wires, the plants, and rules that decide whether or not a city gets to keep growing. Water was one, power is another. Austin runs on a grid that it doesn't fully control. And the AI boom is about to test whether or not there's enough power to go around. Literally, and this time I do actually mean politically. But before we dig into electricity in Austin, let's lay some ground wires. Lauren, when you flip a switch, you turn the lights on in your house, where does that power actually come from?
Yeah, so electricity has to move through a whole chain before it reaches us. And we see the artifacts all around us, but we very rarely think about it. So it starts with power being generated at a power plant, at a wind farm, at a solar array. And then it moves into the transmission system. And these are these big high voltage lines that you often see draped over huge steel towers through fields on the side of the highway. And what's going on here is the power is being stepped up to a very high voltage so that it can be transmitted long distances. This is kind of like the interstate highway for electricity. When it's close to its destination, and where it's needed, the power reaches a substation where the voltage is stepped down. And then these are kind of like the on and off ramps of the grid. From there, it goes into the distribution system, the poles and the wires on your street. They're kind of like your local roads. And then last but not least, the service drop is that last little wire from your street to your meter. So that's kind of like your driveway. One thing that's really important, actually, and people, and confusing, frankly, is that people use electricity, power, and energy kind of like they're interchangeable, but they're not the same thing. And I'm sure we will misuse them at some point in this conversation.
Yes.
But electricity is the category. Power is the amount that the grid can deliver to you at any given time. And so that's basically like how fast the faucet can run. And then energy is power over time. So think about your bathtub filling up.
That is so interesting. I have definitely misused those words all of my life, and I guarantee you I will misuse them today. So forgive me, listeners, in advance.
Same.
But that is interesting. I knew a bit of what you said, but I didn't know the on-off and how important it was depending from when you're moving from wires to substations to whatever it may be. But one other interesting thing that I learned about electricity, I'm going to use, that's the catch-all, right?
Yeah.
So I'll use the catch-all as much as I can.
Category. That's
The
right.
category, yes. So one other interesting thing I learned about electricity is that it is delivered in real time for the most part. And it's just not like water where we can store it in a tank and then access it when we need it.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the way that electricity gets delivered to you, it was produced and it was immediately delivered right then. Until the last few years, really the last decade, with now battery energy storage systems, or BESS. ERCOT's battery fleet, and we're going to talk more about what ERCOT is here in a minute, is now 16 gigawatts, and it's grown 70% in the last 18 months. So massive, massive growth. But the grid, for the most part, is still managed in real time. Batteries are getting more and more important, but definitely that real time capacity is still a constraint. But storage isn't the only problem, right, Lauren?
That's right. And the biggest problem, arguably, at the moment is actually transmission.
Mm.
And we can talk about Texas here just as an example. So in 2024, ERCOT curtailed about 8 terawatt hours of wind and solar. And these numbers are very hard to fathom. So, what is 8 terawatt hours? That's enough energy to power 600,000 homes in Texas for an entire year.
Wow.
And that's how much we curtailed. A major reason that this happens is congestion. So basically, the grid can't move the power from where it's produced to where it's needed. And this is partly because the lines aren't like infinite pipes. It's not really like water at all. At a certain point, too much electricity can actually cause the lines to heat up, to sag, and then they become a risk. And unsafe. So when the grid is trying to move more power than it can, ERCOT has to curtail and dial back some power generation. And so the solution is not to just necessarily build more generation, which is something we all talk about, right? Like bringing new assets to the grid, but also to build bigger electrical highways. And so that's what Texas is in the process of doing. And so sometimes you'll hear about this project that they're undertaking to build the state's first 765 kilovolt transmission lines. And those are largely expected to take, into 2030 at least. And so and the geography of this is pretty interesting. So a lot of power is generated in the Panhandle and in West Texas, where some of these like solar and wind assets are. And it's far from the biggest population centers, which are in the South and the East. And so the question is not necessarily like if we have enough power, but like how do you get it efficiently to the places where it's most needed? Coincidentally, which is also where a lot of these big loads or data centers are being built near the population centers.
Right, exactly. They need it there more than they need it out in the middle of nowhere, West Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we have a good understanding of how the magic, the electricity, reaches our light switches. Let's talk about Austin specifically, starting with the days this magic stopped. So as I opened the episode with, we all know what it's like, everyone who's ever been in Texas in the summer on a hot summer day and you're asked to conserve. These conservation appeals are routine. We're all just used to them at this point. We're used to turning our thermostat up, turning on some fans. The grid is basically just asking us, hey, ease off, make it easier on everyone so that we don't lose power, right? But the irony here is that we are being asked to ration at the exact hours that the system is most valuable to us. Now, this really came to light during what we like to call snowpocalypse or Winter Storm Uri during February 2021. And I will never forget that night, mostly because it was so dramatic and became a national headline, but also because it was truly terrifying. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, just feeling the power go off. I sleep with a white noise machine, so I wake up immediately if the power goes out because I don't hear it anymore. And thinking, okay, well, surely it will come on again soon. But I am so conditioned to sleep with the white noise machine, I couldn't fall back asleep. So at some point, I just got up and I thought, well, I'll make the best of it. I'll go enjoy the sunrise. I think at that point it was probably 4 a.m. But it was getting very cold in the house as it was just snowing down. The snow was gorgeous, but it kept getting colder and colder. And I remember my little dog, Teddy, who's a whopping 13 pounds, just shivering. And I actually have a video of him shivering, and I'd literally bundled him in every piece of dog clothing I owned, which at the time was not that much. I have since purchased so much dog clothing. But he was so cold, and I felt like such a bad dog mom because there was nothing I could do about it. Eventually, one of my neighbors down the street texted me and said, hey, do you have any firewood? And I said, oh, actually, I do, but I don't have an indoor fireplace. And they're like, we have an indoor fireplace.
Nice.
Let's put 2 and 2 together. So we ended up going there and stayed there for the day. When it became clear power was not going to come on, I ended up just risking a drive to my friend who lives downtown because downtown the grid had decided was still allowed to have electricity, likely because there was a hospital. But it was terrifying driving, and actually I have a funny story driving too. As we were driving down the road, there was so much ice. You were advised not to drive, but all the cars were giving so much space and you were constantly like sliding left and right. I actually slid and did a complete 360-degree turn. It was like the slowest turn ever, just waving at everyone.
Oh my gosh.
Other cars
And
like,
then you
sorry.
stopped.
And then I stopped.
That's
and then I
good.
just kept going straight again and made it downtown. But it was wild. I had friends who had newborns who were terrified, and it was a really bad situation. And I know you dug into the numbers more specifically, right?
I did. Yeah. And I knew about it. I think a lot of us learned about it. And, part of it was the sensational aspect of the officials saying, we were minutes and seconds from a total collapse of the grid. And if that happens, it's a tremendous effort to get the grid back online.
Right.
But I didn't know that more than 4.5 million Texans lost power. And it was interesting because the political soundbite became that it was the wind turbines froze in West Texas in the Panhandle. But every fuel type actually had problems. So the gas wells froze, the pipelines lost pressure. Gas plants that were supposed to produce electricity couldn't get enough fuel. And so that's why ERCOT had to force outages. And this is where the fact that ERCOT is isolated and Texas is on its own grid matters, because most of Texas is on its own grid, 90%, actually 10% isn't on the Texan grid. So it couldn't import meaningful power from other states, which is what happens in other states if there's winter storms, because there's two big grids in the United States outside of Texas. There's the Eastern Interconnection, which is east of the Rockies, plus actually parts of Canada. And then the Western Interconnection, which is west of the Rockies, plus parts of Canada and Mexico. So two big grids. Texas, 10% of Texas is actually on the other grids, not on the Texan grid.
Right.
Yeah.
But the vast majority,
Served
by ERCOT and just like completely isolated, saying we're going to solve our own problems ourselves.
Yep.
And Texas deliberately walled itself off. Back in the 1930s, this was a conscious decision to say, no, Texas is going to manage its own electricity, dodging federal regulation effectively. In fact, the federal government tried to force oversight, and back in 1976, the Texas government said, no, we are doing this ourselves. We are not going to allow you to oversee us. So my question for you, Lauren, is, given snowpocalypse, given all of the terrible things that happened as a result, but given Texas's desire for independence and what we're known for there, was our independence worth it? Was the freedom versus the night we were minutes from collapse worth it?
Yeah. I mean, there are pros and cons. So the con, you named it, is when an incident like this happens, which you may be more common because freezes are more common in Texas. Now you're on your own. You can't draw power from other places that are not experiencing the same winter storm as you that could chip in. But the pros are many. So because Texas is in its own, little governance system, it takes a lot less time to build out energy infrastructure in the state. So, an example people give are the transmission lines, the big wind transmission lines that were built. It only took 9 years. It launched in 2005. They built 3,600 miles of high voltage transmission lines for all those wind projects. And a lot of people don't know that Texas has over 20% wind power. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that can happen when you are going it alone and it's not, two big grids that represent basically the rest of the continental U.S. So I think that's more advantaged. But what do you think?
I think so, too. I think you can accomplish quite a bit more without some sort of, there already is a governing body, right? There's a governing body for all of Texas, which is larger than many states.
That's right.
Larger than many combinations of states. So it is already quite a large entity overseeing all of Texas. And I was actually looking up because I was curious. Surely there have been winter storms or other storms that have impacted other areas of the U.S. How did the areas where we had federal oversight of the grid fare? You were probably in New York a few years ago, and I think it was 2023 is what I read, Winter
Mm,
Storm Elliott.
yeah,
Do you remember this?
I don't remember. Did the
You don't
grid fall?
remember it.
I was there.
So it was it was right before Christmas, it
Uh-huh.
said, and it was like a crazy storm, got really, really cold.
Mm,
And apparently FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission,
mm,
said that they nearly avoided a collapse of the
interesting.
entire system there as well.
Right.
And they were connected. It was just a crazy storm that they hadn't anticipated and hadn't weatherized for that level of
I
storm.
see. I totally agree with you. I think there's black swan events everywhere. I don't remember that particular winter storm, and maybe it's because the grid does fail. I mean, the grid's failed multiple times, at least in New York City. I mean, I've been there for a few of the hurricanes. And I've
Right.
also been there in 2005 when I don't know if it was the entire Eastern interconnection that failed, but a big, like, broad swath of the grid came down for a period of time. And New York City was without power for at least 24 hours. And they did the same thing that they did here, which is they first power the hospitals and kind of like the CBD, and then they move to the rest of the area. So no, it's not uncommon for the grid to go down. I think one thing that is a little different is the Northeast is obviously more used to this winter weather. So there's no
Right.
concern about driving, for instance, like they will put down salt and plow. So I think you get this double whammy here in Texas where the grid goes down and on top of it, it's not a winter weatherized state. But no, I agree with you. I also think there's something really interesting, which I didn't know about this, which was when they first started regulating the utilities, it actually kind of expanded. Like, it started in Edison's day, the cities were regulating the utilities, and then it moved to the state, and then the federal government stepped in the 30s, as you said. And so I was trying to figure out why Texas ended up going it alone. Because apparently Texas at the time was not the only state that did not want to be federally regulated. A few states and a bunch of utilities tried to get out of it. But the big difference with Texas seems to be like it's big enough to be alone as a grid,
Yeah.
and it has like significant energy resources and power generation capabilities. So some of the other areas that tried to push back kind of failed on these two. They weren't big enough. They didn't have enough power to kind of go it alone. And then obviously in Texas, there is this sort of, I think, regulatory and political desire to do something like this, which may not exist to the same extent in some of their states.
That makes a ton of sense to me, especially given Texas's history with energy,
Mhm.
like seemingly able to be more self-sufficient than the majority of the rest of the US.
Yep.
So, what has changed since Uri? Lots of positive things came out of a very difficult situation. Senate Bill 3 has forced some weatherization requirements upon ERCOT and throughout the state. Also, Governor Abbott mentioned in his State of the Address in January that 40,000 megawatts of new generation have been added since the storm. There's also been a battery boom, as I mentioned earlier, which helps us by keeping some of that much needed power available for these peak demand times. And as a result of Winter Storm Uri, it's worth mentioning that ERCOT CEO at the time, Bill Magnus, and two PUCT commissioners stepped down because there was this massive error in billing. I don't know if you read about this.
Oh, I did.
$16 billion of overbilling because of the winter storm. There was supposed to be a cap on prices, but it wasn't fully lifted.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was crazy. So all of that is now better regulated. There have been new leadership in place who are helping to make sure we have the proper oversight of pricing as well.
Yeah, and some people receive bills, right, who got power for tens of thousands of dollars, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It was not good
No.
PR.
No, and was that a function of the fact that the market's deregulated?
Yes and no. You know what? I mean, I'm going to say yes. Probably
Think
it is
so.
because it's deregulated.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it doesn't, yeah. That's scary.
It is scary, yes, when it's a deregulated, completely capitalist market, then you are at the whim of prices. But there was a price cap during that
Right,
time
yeah.
that was supposed to be
There
in
was supposed to be
place,
one.
and that's why
Yeah.
this became such an issue, and a lot of leadership had to resign
That's
over it.
Yeah.
So, just to recap, we had a freeze that nearly ended the grid here in Texas. We have summers every single summer where we're asked to sweat it out and just to deal with it. and then we may get some surprise bills after. But if cheap, reliable power is what made Austin successful today and has allowed us to continue to grow and support our population growth, what happens if and when we ever outgrow the grid? But to answer that question, we need to understand how Austin's electricity actually works. So let's talk about the cast, the major players involved with Austin's energy. And funnily enough, the first one we're going to talk about is actually called Austin Energy. So it's a municipally owned electricity company, utility company rather, and it is one of the top 10 largest public utility in the US. I did not know that until I was looking this up. So quite large, serving over 1 million people. Also, they return over $140 million per year to the city's general fund. So a lot of excess charges going into what they charge us for our utility usage. City council sets these rates, not the state. So that is also worth noting. And it's worth noting that the city chose not to opt in to retail choice, meaning that in other parts of Texas, we have a marketplace where we can decide what electric providers we want to choose from versus if you live in Austin, all you get is Austin Energy. ERCOT, we've been saying that a lot. What does that even mean? It stands for Electric Reliability Council of Texas. This is the grid operator for 90% of the state, as Lauren mentioned. We are isolated with very few connections to other grids. It's a nonprofit. It dispatches and balances the grid in real time. So that's generally what ERCOT is responsible for. Another important player is PUCT, and this one is typically spelled out PUCT instead of said as a word. This is the Public Utility Commission of Texas, the state regulator that is overseeing ERCOT and the competitive market. It's comprised of a 5-member board of commissioners. They are all appointed by the Texas governor and then confirmed by the Senate. So very much a political organization here. Last but not least, and although certainly a little bit least, because it's funny to be talking about a water authority here in an energy episode, but LICRA, or the Lower Colorado River Authority, does actually come into play with Austin's electricity because it co-owns the Fayette coal plant with Austin Energy. So they do have a say. Let's talk about what Austin actually runs on too. So those are the key players, but what are we actually using in terms of electricity and what's powering that electricity? So, and I'm going to give just rough mixes here. We have about 4,600 megawatts total capacity, and that's comprised of wind, solar, gas, coal, nuclear, and some biomass. But the vast majority is actually wind, as you mentioned, and solar as well. We have a couple different gas power plants, Sandhill Gas, Decker Gas, 600 megawatts, 200 megawatts for each of those. Nuclear is about 430 megawatts, so pretty substantial there as well. One thing worth noting here, too, as I'm mentioning all these renewable energies, Austin Energy states that 70% of its energy resources are carbon-free generated. This is compared to 46% for Texas and 42% for the US. It's very impressive for Austin being a very green city. But at the same time, we have an issue with local reliability. As you mentioned earlier, these wind farms, these solar plants are often far from the city. And if you need energy in a pinch and you need it nearby, typically that's going to come from gas, although we are ramping up our local battery storage. So we'll talk more about this in a minute, but for now, let's move on to public versus private markets for electricity. So Lauren, I mentioned that not every city is the same, that Austin has a different way of serving with this municipal entity versus other parts of the state of Texas. So can you walk us through how energy supply works across the state?
Okay, so Texas passed Senate Bill 7. That's when they deregulated retail electricity, and they did this in the early 2000s. And this is not the only market that has deregulated retail electricity in the United States, but Texas is a very large one. And so it's helpful to understand a little bit more about that because most consumers in the United States are kind of used to getting their, Con Edison, if you will, just, that's your choice. This is your electricity. Here you go. So what this was that municipal utilities and electric co-ops were allowed to choose at the time if they wanted to deregulate or they wanted to stay a monopoly, essentially a municipal utility monopoly, which sidebar, I love the spirit of that they even let them choose if they wanted to be deregulated. It's like very to the letter.
It is.
So Austin chose the latter, which you mentioned, which has been good for Austin because Austin is getting essentially these dividends of, at least over $100 million a year to the city. And this number is growing as more people move here. And it's going to the city's general fund. So I was trying to figure out whether, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I think a lot of people talk about this and have been looking at it for a long time. So here are some stats, and you'll see where the data gets a little interesting. From 2002 to 2013, one study showed that the average household in deregulated areas actually paid about $4,800 more than customers in cities served by the municipal utilities or co-ops that weren't deregulated. And then another analysis more recent in 2021 showed that deregulated households paid 13% higher rates than the national average. And regulated ones in Texas paid 8% less than the national average. And so, this is interesting, right? Because you would expect, okay, more competition, the prices should go down. But one other interesting stat is that active consumers who deliberately price shopped the plans in the deregulated market can actually save 15 to 30%. So basically, deregulation rewards the active shoppers, but it punishes people who are sort of passive or confused. And where I come out on this is I think it's a bit unfair because if you've ever looked at competing energy plans and tried to shop it yourself, you will see that it is super complicated. There are different limits, there are different terms. It's not something that we all necessarily know how to read. It's going to take a bit of research and education. And so for me, it was a little bit, to take an analogy, like you told someone, okay, why don't you go price shop your MRI? How many people are going to have this, where do you even begin with that, with the lack of price transparency in the medical market? So I don't know, pros, cons, like it feels like a good thing, but this is kind of a tall order. I think and the data shows that it's a tall order for a lot of people if they're actually getting worse prices.
It is a tall order. I am surprised by the stats that you shared because I agree competition should make prices go down and the quality of the service should go up as a result. Like if you think about when AT&T was this giant and you made a long distance phone call and it cost a ton of money versus after they were forced to break up their monopoly 10 years later, it was half the price for a long distance call. Now it's basically free and you have much better smartphones and phone systems than you did before. But to your point, yes, I suppose in certain markets it could be cheaper, but like what are you giving up as a result? And I also wonder if there's a way we could have deregulation and have the ability to have cheaper prices, but require transparency in the pricing model. Because if the issue is that people are confused, it just means that they're not being clear about their pricing. And the same thing is happening right now with multifamily rents, with apartment rents, where fee transparency has been a huge issue with renters basically saying we need to understand all of the fees involved before we sign a lease, and the government stepping in and saying, yes, you do. In order to be fair, these things have to be clear to you. So I don't think that anyone would ever say there should be one apartment provider for all of the US, but instead it's let's have multiple apartment providers, but make it very clear how you should price them. So I feel like if we did that, then more people would be able to take advantage of those 30% cheaper rates that you mentioned, and then it truly would be more cost effective.
If the pricing was simpler.
If the pricing was simpler, exactly.
Which energy markets are not known for simple pricing, in my opinion.
I know.
Yeah. Although I do think someone should do a study where you follow a set of consumers and they input all the plan options that they have into Claude or Chat GPT or your LLM of choice and see
Yes.
what their savings is, because maybe, then you wouldn't have to do sort of the dirty work of trying to understand what they're trying to sell you with all these. But I mean, inertia can really be a big component in this, where, how often do people really swap out their Wi-Fi or their home cable plans? They just kind of sit there, and you could reshop and have better savings.
You
So
could, exactly. And I wonder how much of this too is, even if you're in a deregulated area, sometimes there's only one electricity provider. In many cases throughout rural Texas, there's only one electricity provider, and they can jack up the prices however much they want because you're at the mercy of that provider.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is one other really interesting thing here, just to looking at the numbers. So, okay, so Austin Energy in 2024, and they reported that they had $1.141 billion in operating revenues, and they had a $115 million transfer to the city. That's about a 10% surcharge, or like public dividend, if you will. And so basically, I was coming to the conclusion that if you can save 15 to 30% in a deregulated market, that's great. But if you're in a deregulated market and you only save 10% or less, you're still worse off, because while we can quibble about whether the city of Austin spent the money well, technically that 10% dividend doesn't go to a private party. It goes back to the city and to services and to people's salaries. So the bar isn't just you need to save money in the deregulated markets. At least against Austin, you need to save 10% or more to be at par.
Oh, but this is what irks me, right? It's effectively a tax that you have no control over.
That's
like,
right.
I'm not voting on how these dollars are getting spent. I'm just donating
That's
to the
right,
city,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
like
Yeah.
not okay. That is not okay as a taxpayer. You should have more say on exactly how these dollars that you're getting charged are getting spent.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the whole type. Well, and when you move here from a state that actually has a state tax or a city tax, you find, oh, hey, there's all these really interesting little fees in my energy bill and my water bill. Property taxes are very high, so yeah, that it's arbitrary, or they decided what those numbers were, so, by vote
we're
or
just
not.
not calling it a tax.
Yeah,
But we are being
it's a dividend.
taxed.
Yeah, so you're right. So it all comes down. If you think they spent the money wisely, then cool. If they didn't, then yeah, I mean, that's no different than paying, just providing margin to that private utility.
It is. Yes. And it will irk everyone that now knows that
Yeah.
they are paying taxes, just not calling it
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So that 10% could be less if you think that maybe, I don't know, 2% of the dividend was spent wisely. Not the whole 10%, but just 2%, then yeah, I mean, then that's your number.
It's whatever your margin of comfort is.
That's
for
right.
something like this. It could be 0%.
It
For
could be
some of us,
0.
it could be all the way to 10 or 30
It
for
could be
others.
0. Yeah, yeah.
But, well, that is who runs our electricity in Austin, and this is how it works. But how does any of that get built? Who pays for it? Let's talk a bit about that there. And I also have a personal story here, because my husband and I are building a home, and we actually had to negotiate with our new electricity provider, because we purchased land. And anytime you purchase land, either as a residential landowner or to build a commercial property, you actually have to bring that electricity to the land. That's effectively a developer's, what a developer does. So you don't just tap into the power. You actually have to build, you have to bring in poles, you have to bring in wires, you have to do the trenching. It's not cheap. And there is no sort of benefit to you other than the value of the land goes up at the end of the day. The term for all of this is contributions in aid of construction, which I did not know there was a term for this, but there is a term for it. And it's basically that you're doing all of the civil work here as the landowner. Even though the grid is this sort of public shared system, the last mile is always going to be on you. And that's why I wanted to talk about that new 765 kilovolt transmission line that you mentioned earlier, Lauren. So it's a new build out, but it is seeing a lot of backlash by landowners, especially because of all of the trenching, all of the massive poles, and just huge amount of construction that is going over someone's land through someone's garden, for example.
Yeah.
And these are some of the highest voltage lines that have ever been planned by ERCOT, just in ERCOT's history. It's driven by West Texas load growth. You can imagine data centers, also electrification of oil and gas plants, renewables, and just generally population growth. It's literally thousands of miles of new transmission, tens of billions of dollars of investment. It's also hundreds of landowners who were notified initially about this transmission line and PUCT. Now they're involved in all of these routing fights. And because of these routing fights, PUCT has said, okay, we're going to rearrange this a little bit. Now, thousands of landowners are impacted. And part of the pushback is that they're not being notified with enough time to appropriately appeal on behalf of themselves. And this is where it's crazy. It's literally landowner versus landowner because you don't get to come together in a sort of class action lawsuit situation here. It's me saying, hey, Lauren, my next door neighbor, I don't want my land to get torn up by all this trenching. I'd rather it be on your land. And I don't want to stare at these. And so it's literally us arguing about who gets to have this transmission line go through it. And that has been a big issue. As I mentioned, thousands, over 1,400 landowners have been notified. And again, many of them say that they don't have enough time to appropriately appeal and push it onto their neighbor's land instead of theirs. But this is basically an eminent domain issue. At the end of the day, it's infrastructure that will serve the whole system, but no one wants it in their backyard.
By the way, I love that they are upset that they don't have enough time to appeal because they already know they don't want it. It's not like they don't have enough time to like get comfortable with the idea.
No, it's like we need more time to appeal.
We really, no matter what, we just don't want this here and we're going to fight it until we lose. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's been stalled. PUCT is like, they stalled it as of a week ago. So probably this will still get done.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of trying to find the landowners that are most comfortable with it and then a route that appropriately goes through all of those areas.
Do they do anything to try to convince people? Like a bounty, you know, like
a
little, can we pay you? Yeah.
Maybe they will. I mean, maybe that will be part of the negotiation. Yeah. It's still early at this point, but the goal is to try to have this settled by the end of the year. Right. Let's talk about AI. We cannot not talk about electricity and energy and not talk about AI. So Reuters reported that ERCOT is evaluating over 438,000 megawatts of large load requests. So a ton of new requests for electricity. About 89% of those are from data centers. This is all under the new PUCT ERCOT batch zero process. And batch zero is basically their way for dealing with the onslaught, all of these new requests to connect to the grid. They've said, we'll just approve them in batches as opposed to one by one.
And that's important because they just approved that framework.
Yes.
Like a couple, I think maybe a week ago was approved by the state government and PUCT and, or just PUCT, but they're going to find out. So they're going to, people are going to be notified in August if their project's qualified, and then they'll have their first series of results from that in the fall of 2027. So rather than assess one data center at a time, they're going to do it all in a batch. So, and that it's quite different than how they were operating before. And other states are looking to do this too.
It's much more efficient versus just piecemeal one by one. I wish they would do this with other development projects as well. Let this set the precedent, please, for future development projects. All right, but let's talk about what is that 438,000 megawatts? What does that even mean? How can we quantify that in terms that we can actually understand? So 1 megawatt is about 250 homes powered at peak power throughout the year, 800 average homes on an average energy usage basis. Or in other words, 438,000 megawatts would power over 350 million homes. That is a lot of homes. Now, if you're only talking about a single data center, like a single hyperscale campus, that draws about 100 to 1,000 megawatts continuously. If you scale that up, a gigawatt AI campus is 8.7 million megawatt hours per year. So it really just depends on the type of data center, the type of campus. And it's worth noting that that 8.7 million megawatt hours is bigger than Austin Energy's entire residential load today. And it's more than half of Austin Energy's total customer sales. So a massive, massive amount just for one data center. So one of these large data centers is effectively like adding a small city to the grid. I do want to be clear, as we talked about this, not all data centers are the same. So traditional cloud data centers, storage, streaming, enterprise, these racks are in the typical single-digit kilowatts, so a lot smaller than these AI data centers. Campuses can be in the tens of megawatts. Demand has been steady and predictable over the last 20 years of growth that we've seen, not really an issue with the grid these days. It's the AI data centers. So training and inference, these GPU racks are anywhere from 30 to 130 kilowatts. Campuses of hundreds of megawatts to gigawatts with massive power swings that are much harder for the grid to absorb. Yeah. And the pipeline for these is just lumpier because, as I mentioned, one of them can have a huge impact versus a single cloud data center you'd barely even notice. So the real shift here with AI, with data centers, is not that data centers are new. It's just that AI has shifted the conversation about data centers in terms of the size and the shape of that demand.
And it's also shifted where they're located, because the benefit of cloud, you want to have easy access to your data storage. So a lot of these data centers have been placed closer to population centers by design, whereas the AI data centers, I mean, they are, but they're also placed more and more in, this random town that never had a data center. They just happen to have power, and that's fine for the use case. And so it's broadened, I think, everyone's exposure to these facilities or to the resulting energy prices.
Exactly. And we're all used to the lag a bit on these AI tools at this point. Actually, fun fact. Did you know that there's a company that is monetizing the lag?
No.
Sorry, this is separate from the episode.
Really?
Or I guess you could include it. But speaking of the lag,
Yeah.
there is a startup who literally day one of launching made $70,000 in their first day. Because what they did is they said, okay, this is the most watched screen in America, possibly the world right now, the Claude loading screen. Why don't I find a way to create a plugin that places ads there for companies?
That's funny.
Very smart. Yeah. So he definitely benefits by data centers being in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, interesting. Cool. Will they pay for your Claude monthly fee if you download the widget?
Yes, they will.
Oh.
That's the incentive. It's not
I'll
the full monthly fee, but it's like you get some. Yeah, exactly. Do it later. Get paid a little bit while you're using it.
Yeah.
Yes, but you get paid
It's like
some
Rakuten
fraction
all over
of
again.
it.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes, he's very pleased with the
What's it
lag
called?
time. I can't remember. I knew you were going to say that. Let me look it up. Kickbacks and gig bucks are the two ones.
Awesome.
What a weird name.
Kickbacks and gig bucks.
And gig
Wonderful.
bucks are the two
bucks.
very funnily named companies. Yeah. Well, now we know how to make a little money on our Claude. Let's talk about ERCOT again. Let's talk about ERCOT's plans and constraints. Will we actually be able to support all of this new data center development? And I know, Lauren, you looked into some of these stats.
I did. Yeah. I took the following approach, which was I wanted to try to better understand supply here, demand, and then let's try to do the math actually and see if Texas can pull it off. So, okay. Supply. ERCOT's 2025 annual report says that from 2021 to 2025, they synchronized approximately 62,000 megawatts of new generation and storage to the electric grid. And sidebar, if you include battery storage, over 90% of that is clean, which is interesting. If you assume this number is steady state, and that's how much they're able to do over that 5-year time period, then that's about 12.4 gigawatts per year, including the battery storage. So remember that number. And let's go back to demand. So you mentioned that ERCOT is tracking 438 gigawatts of large load requests, and about 89% are data centers, nearly. However, we all know that developers shop these projects to different utilities because they want to maximize the odds of their project getting approved in various locations. And they're even willing to pay what is now becoming up to $100,000 feasibility study fee paid to the utilities. Because if you win the jackpot and your data center comes to market in the next couple of years, it more than paid back for even a $100,000 fee. So we can come to the conclusion that this demand number is inflated. And ERCOT's more realistic base case for total grid demand is actually 111 to 138 gigawatts. So that's
significantly less.
And that's total. So that's including us. Although we know the data centers are going to use apparently all of the energy.
Yes.
so that's up though. So that's up from the all-time peak here in Texas, which was in August 2023 of 85.5 gigawatts. So that's the difference. And to bring this all together, so we have supply, right? We have demand. And, I think it sounds, how are we going to pull this off? So I did the math. This is very much an oversimplification, but I think it's helpful because so if ERCOT adds that 12.4 gigawatts of power generation to the grid a year, and the incremental gap, that 111 to 138 gigawatts that we talked about. So that's about 52.5 gigawatts between our all-time peak and what they expect. And you simply divide them. That's about 4 years to generate enough nameplate capacity to meet all the existing load requests that we have right now. 4 years is not a crazy number. And I mean, this comes with a ton of caveats, right? We're making many assumptions. And even I'm not including the time it's going to take to even study the transmission effects of these data centers. But, I think that's important that, it's less time than you think. And I think that's testament to deregulation, how fast you can build things here.
That's true. It makes a ton of sense. And everyone is jumping in to try to get the opportunity to get a part of that AI pie from an infrastructure development standpoint.
Yeah. So, when you ask me, will we have enough power in ERCOT, I think there's 4 leading indicators to watch because obviously that's just back of the envelope math and things are evolving. And the 4 things to keep mind of are the batch zero results, which we talked about, because when they're done doing that batch study, they'll know what true demand is. 2 is whether the projects are actually requesting grid service. There's a lot of very large projects that are announcing dedicated power. There was just one, Chevron and Microsoft signed a 20-year deal to build a co-located gas-fired power facility here in West Texas. So there's more and more of that. You can see if that velocity, those requests tick up, people go their own way on power, which may very well happen. The generation types. So it's not enough, as you were talking about earlier, just to do, solar when it can't be on all the time. You need these always on power generation sources like oil or maybe, nuclear. Or you need, the solar with the battery capacity. So it has been more complicated. And then the last is regulation, which, I know we're going to get into, but that's the 4th thing to watch.
That all makes sense. It is also wild to me that it's now it's penciling. It is penciling to build your own power plant, not even power plant. It is now penciling to build your own energy source.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's just insane because that's not cheap. It would be so much easier to plug into the grid, but there's so much money to be made with these AI data centers that they're like, it's fine. We'll figure it out. Just build it.
Super interesting. Yeah, because, I think a lot of developers will talk as well about kind of like the blue energies of the world where they're sort of paying for this service. But I think the Chevron Microsoft announcement's interesting because you have these big energy players who are saying, let me get in the game. And, I don't know what their partnership terms are.
I don't know, but they must be making some money off of it, right? They're not doing it for the good of the world.
Yeah.
They're doing it because it's profitable.
Exactly. And you might not have just purchased, a project or a power source. You might have signed a longer term partnership agreement to share in the proceeds. So who knows? There's a lot of interesting ways to structure these deals too.
That's true. Maybe they did some sort of overriding royalty interest like they would with an oil and gas well, but they did it for this power generation on site for AI data centers. Really a smart move by Chevron. And what was the other one that you said?
Yeah, this is the Chevron Microsoft.
Yes,
project.
really a smart move.
I don't know
Chevron.
the terms of the deals, but I think that's a fair assumption. And I also think that more of that will happen.
Yeah, I think more of it will happen too. From a regulation standpoint, Texas passed Senate Bill 6 last June, so 2025, and the state's answer to the AI boom has a few components. Data centers should pay their own way for grid updates, much like homeowners who pay their way for the last mile. They also need to curtail load or use backup generation during emergency conditions. That way, the ratepayers don't foot the bill. We don't have to pay for AI consuming power at these data centers. PUCT also announced new rules on interconnection. They propose now a 50,000 megawatt fee, lobbied down from over 100,000. So some concessions were given there. As you mentioned, and we've talked about the batch zero review process, that's also been part of the state's response to data center demand. And more recently, the rewriting transmission cost allocation. This is basically how prices get charged at peak demand times. It's called the 4CP method. Those rules will probably be wrapped up and announced at the end of 2026. This is all needed, very much so, because ERCOT projects residential rates will rise by 29% by 2030.
Wow.
And this is driven largely by transmission and distribution investment and costs. Again, 90% of the demand coming from data centers, 89%. So even if your usage stays flat, even if you are saying, yes, it's 4 p.m. in the heat of the summer and I'm going to turn my AC up to conserve, doesn't matter, your bill is still going to climb because we would have more of this demand. So it will be interesting as a leading indicator to see how these data center developers respond to this new regulation. And that is the perfect place to wrap up our discussion about Austin and electricity. So Austin sold itself on cheap, clean, abundant power, a keep it weird, keep it green mentality, and growth and AI are now testing whether or not that still holds. Austin isn't running out of power tomorrow. We have weatherized, we have added batteries, we have written a plan. But will we be able to support ourselves as Texas continues to be a leader in data center development, population growth, and electrification? Because when growth starts outpacing the grid, even the coolest cities can start to overheat. We'll see you next time.